Britain, global warming, every year, year on year, the first harvest is getting earlier. End of May, the first harvest. In France, earlier still, second harvest of certain crops can be seen. And the last harvest of St Michaelmas getting later. St Michaelmas, the date when the devil fell from heaven and fell into a blackberry bush and spat on it or urinated on it, depending on where in Britain you come from. So you shouldn't eat or pick blackberries in Britain after the first week in October, because they've been cursed. Also the patron saint's day of the police. And the Lord Mayor of London is elected on this day. Wild coincidence. What did your daughter do at school today? What did your daughter do at school today? She may have had her turn to read to class. Disrupted by more challenging students, intimidated, and doesn't want to read to class anymore, despite teachers' efforts. Meticulous and extensive strategies. She might have had her learning disrupted by one or more or several children in the classroom with baby bladder that their parents insist that there's no need for them to try and use the muscles to hold and not need to go to the toilet every time the teacher needs to explain the learning to the whole class or take the register, perhaps. Your daughter may have used her pester power that you'll be more than familiar with at home. Can you resist the nagging? The mithering, it tends to be called in northern England. Nagging, it tends to have some negative connotations for women of yesteryear for some reason, in my mind. She may have had her learning disrupted by one or a number of people in the class wanting to argue any subject at all or no subject at all with the teacher as they try and do the register and as they try and present what work needs doing at the start of the lesson to the whole class. She may be the persistent arguer. Do you insist that the school mollycoddles your child? You may be insisting that your child and their immediate needs, however inspired they are, come first before another 20 or 30 other children all at once. We'll come back to this, of course. As always, the images here tell one story, and the dialogue are connected, but another story. A town that gets described as What did your daughter do at school today? It's described as centre of the Cotswolds. Swing when you're winning. Did your daughter other and opposite at school when you're not today? Brexit has she may have had her decline and vacation of real prestige properties that would never usually come about. Well, throughout the Cotswolds, really. Not to overstate it, but there's some picture postcard, world-famous Cotswold towns and villages that have got portfolios of properties in the same town up for sale. These are properties that would usually never come up, would be kept in the family because they're just so hard to come by and have an innate value. Often in more boom times, they'd be popular with the design workshops or the footballers' wives' hobby shop, not necessarily footballers' wives, but a rich, idle wife that wants a hobby that perhaps costs more than it brings in. And they want a beautiful location where they can attract in even richer, possibly more idle people than themselves, and have a lovely time. Lifestyle choice properties, individually and as a whole, are often going to be foreign owners, and they're just leaving Britain, leaving the countryside in droves and the country, and no one's noticing. A lot of signboards going up in town, a lot of charity shops in the high street. Accessibility to these properties are why people manufacture a slump. A slump isn't teleological from God. People gain from other people's misery and induce it. We can question First Testament economics, Zionists that are themselves anti-Semitic. We can try and blame Cambridge Analytica, but really, it's everyone that voted Brexit, and they didn't have the sense to see that they were being used. It's a race to the bottom, I tell you. Mollycoddling into the gutter, and that brings Brexit. What did your daughter do at school today? What did your daughter do at school today? She may have had her turn. This is since the introduction of timetable efficiencies, I think. It's slightly, well, since teachers have become more and more qualified, they've become more and more expensive. Certainly in boom times, people could just walk into better paid jobs in private industry. But now, private industry people are scrabbling desperately to get some reliable, dependable income, like teaching. Timetable efficiency has meant that, well, before mobile phones and instant access internet, schools had to give less lessons to individual teachers. It gave them more headspace, but it also made them available for when other teachers were ill or something, couldn't make it into school. Whether it was their usual subject or not, all the children knew exactly where they stood with all the teachers. It didn't get as bad as primary, one teacher, one form group. But now with mobile phones and internet, supply teachers, cover teachers, they're instantly available. Call them and they'll be there half an hour later. You can shove them into a classroom with no cover work for them to present to the children and expect them to work miracles. Some of them can. And schools just will not support the supply teacher, the same as they do the regular teacher, even though close. The children, they've never met this person before. They're supposed to do what they're told. Now, it is really the most natural thing in the world not to do what a stranger tells you just because you're in a different environment where the school tells you you must. But at the same time, the highly investigated and qualified supply teacher isn't there to hurt your child. Your child is there to hurt them. One child that needs to be listened to in one class is abusing, basically, the human rights of 20 or 30 others. So often meeting that child, it's like, you just know what the parents are going to be like. Often they work at the school. One department may be 2 staff down, but to ask for the cover work for the children, you're belittling the teacher. I know, can't get my head around that either. But you work through an agency as a supplier or a cover teacher, and that agency gets feedback from schools. Any student can create any situation, and it can get reported back to the agency that the teacher has been made to feel that way, not the student. But your daughter wants to do her own investigations of what the supply cover teacher is like. They don't want to depend on what the school and what the assessment organisations have to say. 14 can be a difficult age, especially for a girl. What's that, about year 9 usually in the UK? This new person in their life might become as important to them as some of their other teachers. They need to experiment and see what they're like. They need to test them, and that comes in many different forms. Many of them constitute the child assaulting the teacher. Not all. Some 14-year-old girls are very developed. They feel the need to squeeze past the teacher unnecessarily. They're experimenting on them. Some run round and round the class, like chasing, and they're sort of wanting you to block their way ever so slightly so that they can't cause such disruption and build up to such a crescendo. They have no obligation to stop. You might think, well, if the teacher can't do it to them, they can't do it to the teacher. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. It's nonsense. Makes a useful adage, but nonsense. Judges, like judges in courts, go through a process, essentially a victim-blaming process, according to what complicity there was. Sadly, in America still, there's some Republican judges that ascribe she was begging for it mentality to some of their judgments. Your daughter and her friends may well have ganged up on the supply teacher and behaved like a pack of dogs, really, throughout the lesson, loosely calling it here a lesson. A class full of children can really act together like a pack. It's quite an amazing thing to see sometimes. Existentially, it can create almost an out-of-body experience. When you've got, more usually half a dozen, it takes that many to form the pack, you see. But sometimes up to 20, it's often girls. The 10 to 20 girls, including your daughter possibly as the ringleader, have been shouting and barking their need, their instructions over the instructions that the supply teacher is trying to read from their regular teacher. They're not wanting to work, they're wanting to descend on the supply teacher as a pack for the whole of the hour. This can be physical crowding, it can be just shouting out one after the other all at the time, getting louder and louder. I don't want to use the word frenzy really, but on rare occasions your daughter can work her way into a frenzy of this pack activity, much the same as a football crowd can act like animals. Now, you can't describe your daughters as a pack of dogs, but wolves might be more acceptable to the senior leadership team that you're trying to describe the problem to. While wolves does tend to describe ripping and tearing, and it's not really, it's more when the wolves crowd round, like in The Revenant, I think it is. No, there's a couple of films with it. The wolves crowd round and they're growling. They're stronger as a pack than the human. It's only a matter of time until he is their prey. Or she, there's a he in the film, you see. That's just one lesson, but of course if it's happened in one lesson, it gets spread as, great laugh, we were doing this. And it can be 3 lessons in a day that you account, and there's another 2 that might be almost as bad. There are, of course, some of the pack, and it's not always an exclusively female pack, don't get me wrong. that start to pity the prey a little bit, and they do recognise what's happening and their part in what's happening. And the group does get a little bit smaller over days and weeks. Now, the she-wolf of the female dog pack, obviously isn't always, but maybe part of the senior leadership's team family. There may be a husband and a wife at the school. And that doesn't mean that the children are automatically going to be horrendous. Far from it. But they're likely to have a distinctive, very passive-aggressive, strong whip snap to their tail, even if they're model pupils. Now, you think this pack of dogs is a metaphor, perhaps an analogy, a simile. It's far from an isolated incident when it's not. Completely out of the blue, you will get a girl, when the teacher walks up to them, asking them to be on task. They don't want to stop doing some taking selfies of themselves and their friends. She doesn't want to be asked again to try and get on task, please. This is the girl barking at the teacher. Now, once one starts, the crazy behaviour starts to become the norm. And so, while it can be an isolated incident, there's certainly instances of more than one, more than three 14-year-old girls barking at one teacher, asking students to be on task and do the work that the school and their regular teacher has said, can result in the student perhaps thinking that, I don't know what they're thinking quite honestly, thinking that the teacher is expecting them to perform like seals, I don't know, expecting them to jump to it after being asked half a dozen or a dozen times, create some instant history of having gone through getting to know the person, and they're not just a stranger in front of you barking orders to get on task, even closer to whimpering pleases to get on task. Your daughter today was on her knees on the classroom, walking around on all fours, barking, and the teacher's stepping away from the crazy behaviour, obviously. She's barking at another student that's supposed to be outside, but they're doing a circuit, and in, do a circuit, out again. She's trying to bark at the service of the teacher, I think, trying to get the student to be outside where they've been put outside to wait for the senior leadership team to come and collect them. Member, not team. Only takes one. Because the senior leadership have a threat. They threaten. They have a useful mechanism that they can employ without questioning. Now, you might think that your daughter is a little bit embarrassed about this behaviour, but it marks her out. When the senior leadership arrive for the other child that's waiting for them, that it's taken 10 minutes to get on an email and have them called, when the senior leadership person arrives, the supply teacher says, you have to explain why you think certain students should be removed. Do you remember what were you doing? Running round and round. How many times did you? About 3. I felt uncomfortable about it, but I did put my arm out or try and cover the gangway so you would slow down. You made the right choice and stopped, but then you changed your mind and pushed on through the teacher. I mean, I wasn't offering any resistance, so I didn't get pushed over. And how many times did you run around the class? About half a dozen. I think that's probably more like it. And are you feeling okay about, you could perhaps share with the SLT call out, what was our interaction like earlier in the lesson towards the start? The student has no shame at all in recreating the barking. This is your daughter. Can you believe it's your daughter? It is your daughter. This is what your daughter is like. The classroom, it's a safe environment. Apart from those. The parents aren't going to complain. The senior leadership's husband and wife's problem child, shall we call them, is intimidating and bullying and restricting the learning of the most needy in the classroom, whose parents aren't going to complain. This isn't a metropolitan place by any stretch of the imagination. It's a countryside area, and everyone knows everyone, and they know their social status. To senior leadership in a family money house, they've got money. This is interesting to some of the girls that don't come from money. They can befriend someone, they can identify someone, they might have the same unusual coloured hair, or spend a lot of time in the reflection room. Have a shared sense of play. Now, you would think that this same unusual coloured hair boy and girl seem inseparable in their sense of play. It can be necessary. There isn't always two doors to put them outside. You can put them either side of the door. Some schools you can't even put them outside. You want to be moving them around the room. You don't know who they do. You have some sense, but it is really only a sense who they get on with, who they don't get on with, who you can put them next to, who it really is a mistake. You have a seating plan. It's obviously printed out, so there's no chance of reading it or recognising the photos, because then the department would have to hold the detentions. But for the girl to have access, potentially in the future, to something more than friendship and access to the family money, or just be invited along to nicer occasions, she's going to show off to this same unusual coloured hair child. But most of all, she wants to experiment on the teacher, the adult in the classroom. See what she does and how they react or don't react at all. It's boring teaching. Your daughter today, on the power pole that goes from floor to ceiling, that carries the electricity for the sockets, pole dancing for quite an extended period in the middle of the lesson. I think it was geography. Was it geography? Did look a little bit like a science lesson. But for 5 minutes and intermittently for 30 seconds at a time, teacher trying best to just pretend they haven't noticed. Pole dancing. It's one girl's pole dancing lessons to the others. I mean, I dread to think what sort of eyeful the kicking the leg up in the wisp of a skirt was given to the poor people that were giving her any attention. Sometimes it's just best to give people no attention. Now, on some other roofs, she gets put out the door. I know, it sounds like putting your dog out for a wee, doesn't it, at night? Where in the corridor, she's bending over and then turning around, flat of her back against the wall, and rhythmic movements of her arms above her head and her legs out and wide, caressing the back wall. Just stay there and calm down for a bit and get bored, and I'll come and speak to you in a minute. Your nice, privileged, small town school, your daughter is either barking like a dog or pole dancing to impress the new fresh meat in school. Who would be impressed with such amateur dramatics? Goes from floor to ceiling, that carries the electricity for the sockets. Pole dancing for quite an extended period in the middle of the lesson. I think it was geography. Was it geography? Did look a little bit like a science lesson. But for 5 minutes and intermittently for 30 seconds at a time, teacher trying best to just pretend they haven't noticed. Pole dancing. It's one girl's pole dancing lessons to the others. I mean, I dread to think what sort of eyeful the kicking the leg up in the wisp of a skirt was given to the poor people that were giving her any attention. Sometimes it's just best to give people no attention. Now, on some other roofs, she gets put out the door. I know, it sounds like putting your dog out for a weed, doesn't it, at night? Where in the corridor, she's bending over and then turning around flat of her back against the wall in rhythmic movements of her arms above her head and her legs out and wide, caressing the back wall. Just stay there and calm down for a bit and get bored, and I'll come and speak to you in a minute. Your nice, privileged, small town school, your daughter is either barking like a dog or pole dancing to impress the new fresh meat in school. Who would be impressed with such amateur dramatics?
Is a Jewish opposition to the financial, legal and medical bullying of any critic of apartheid, genocide, anti-Zionist, opposed the construction of Palestinian enclaves that are all that is left of a diaspora Palestinian state. like the use of the N-word and the use of the anti-Semitic, marks you as against both the Arab and the Jewish people, and so marks you as a Zionist. And
Expunged. Sounds nice. To me, it's the Birmingham Six get released from prison and the British government has to, so they're not being iced of some kind, they have to wipe everyone's criminal records every 10 years. I did look up the antonyms of expunged. They're much nicer words. Expunged gets associated with annihilation. What did your daughter do at school today? Unpleasant, rather than forge or restore. But can a person or a group expunge themselves? What did your daughter do? It's still difficult today. You still see on television how she may have had her turn to read other German industries war profiteered and have stuck with it. Some much worse than others. Much of American industry war profiteers again. For a generation, Germany was sort of expunged of sympathy. But this current affairs that has taken me away from taking the grit out of the little chute at the bottom of the washing machine. I'm really starting to ask myself if a group of people can expunge themselves of sympathy. The tenuous link here is contemporary accounts of the First World War, considered literary, published accounts rather than emotive newspaper reports, but not a whole lot different as it's happening. I'm tempted to link a third thing, but I don't really have a third media. What did your daughter do at school today? The people power revolution of a country that you'll either know or you won't know. In the 1960s. Did your daughter? And it's boiling down to simply overthrowing a dictator, and then who owns the land on what you're living on? Who do you pay rent to or not? So no one pays any rent in this particular country. Guess where? You probably won't. It's just a step between the First World War and current affairs. And they didn't send any cute Johnny Foreigner troops that helped us out super. They fared quite well in the conflict. But the People Power Revolution used Radio Veritas as the mobilising of the fairly illiterate population. The First World War, they were a fairly illiterate population, but it was peer pressure and mass media and coming round to your house type pressure. Now, the current affairs, there is a lot of peer pressure from social media, manipulated voting, but mainly blatant propaganda from the youngest age, cradle to the grave propaganda. How much complicity does the population have if they don't see anything else? Americans find it difficult to live in Israel. I hope how most people in the world know how America was colonised, I suppose. Encourage lots of people from all over the world to America. China and Europe. And what now, Afro-Americans. And displace the people, the native Indians, because we didn't know what to call them, settle their land and, over a very short period, kill off all their food supply. Fight them with overwhelming firepower, machine guns against bows and arrows, and then put them in reservations like open plan prisons that you're not allowed to leave. Tighten these reservations into walled prisons. Now, I'm talking about the Wild West, but I'm also talking about the state of Israel and the state of Lebanon. Now, you might have seen in the news a few years ago how there was an explosion at a Beirut port. France President, turned up and said, "I know you're our ex-colony, but we're going to support you in your time of need." And the news in France showed lots of cheering for Papa, basically. It's better to have help than not have help when you need it. But so patronising. You have to wonder whether it was actually an accident. Things were intensifying then, but when the world's gaze is on Ukraine, and no one's really paying attention to what's going on in the West Bank and Gaza and Israel, now's the time to tighten the walls, and they did. Jerusalem is a complex issue, but there's a Lebanese part. Lebanese is supposed to be ex-Jordan, but they're a mature people, and they can fight their own battles, we hope. Anywhere you live, you may be familiar with reading in the news how the local politicians, they've been in a little while and they've redrawn the boundaries, the voting constituencies, so they'll always get elected now. They've got a great majority. Well, a bit like that, the Israelis around the Lebanese part of Jerusalem just built another wall, or moved a wall, so that what was a 80-20 excuse me if I'm wrong, Lebanese dominated. They've built a wall, so now it's 60% Israeli. Of course, this went largely unreported. So a big chunk of sacred to both sides Jerusalem can now vote to be part of a different state. Northern Ireland, I'll bring back in again. Through higher birth rates on the Catholic side, the Protestants are going to eventually lose Northern Ireland. Home rule, a huge thing for the most right-wing parts of the British government. They don't want to lose it, so they use Cambridge Analytica to skew election results. And we end up with Brexit in the Wild West in Ireland. Now, I hold my hands up that I'm digressing a little bit. It's a very similar idea to Cambridge Analytica. Was used to fake Eurovision Song Contest results so that Israel won, and so they get appointed as the new host. They tried to use new host status for political gain and move all of the Arabs, that are obviously troublemakers, out of their host city that they'd chosen of Jerusalem. But rules of the Eurovision Song Contest were upheld, and they had to change it to Tel Aviv, and so there's no real advantage. But the wall remains. Now, there's a holy site. There's several holy sites, but the third most holy site for the Arab Palestinians, I'm rather reluctant to pronounce things wrong and offend someone. There's like a two temple place, pretty much in the same complex, the Dome of the Rock, and this other one that a mob descended on. A mob of Israelis surrounded the third holiest site of Islam, and I'm forgetting to set up another thing. The state of Lebanon, recognised by the United Nations, is policed by Israelis. I know, it sounds a bit daft. The local Lebanese were stopped from entering the mosque by the Israeli police. The local Israelis were, the Jewish people forced themselves into the third holiest site of Islam, and I don't know what they did when they got in there, but rabbis don't allow Jewish people to enter the Muslim sites in case something non-Jewish friendly happens in there. It reflects badly on the nation of Israel. So Israel has been constricting the reservations into prisons and avoiding the links, allowing them to deal with their own water supplies, but at the same time restricting water supplies to the reservations, as I'm calling them, in connection to the Native American problem. Anyway, the attack from Hamas in a separate, not the West Bank, which is where Jerusalem is, a separate area on the coast. Hamas, different group from Hezbollah. All of these are historic power bases for the Arab Lebanese. Attack them and you attack us. Attack us and we attack you. That's the general idea of how the violence started against Israel. Now, when I was at school, teaching about Northern Ireland has changed since then, but Molly McGuinty's Cabbage Patch, that is like a denigration. The battle of the punch-up at Molly McGuinty's Cabbage was the denigration of the Irish War of Independence, the first Irish War of Independence, in British history books. Now, Hamas, tiny little thing, in Gaza Strip, tiny little thing, in order to break through even the huge defences that Israel has around these military defences, not just the militarised police inside. It's really quite an accomplishment to get through those Israeli defences out of Gaza into Israel. Now, this is described by Israel as a rocket attack on a rave. Now, if you sign up for the military, whether it's conscripted or compulsory, you're not going to get a job as a teacher unless you do volunteer for the military, you're asking for it. I was going to put it at the start, actually, that this is coming from someone that thinks that religion is a fairly unhealthy state of psychological mind. Any military target is fair game, but civilian targets, you're out of order. You need to smart up your weapons. And Israel should have those smart weapons, because Americans are not shy in selling them. Neither's France, for that matter, but I don't think the Lebanese can afford it anyway. Perhaps that's what blew up in that warehouse in the port. Perhaps America blew up a French export. I understand it's all a bit First Testament when it comes to invading a country, kidnapping some people and then using them as human shields, but Israel doesn't seem too concerned about their own citizens there. Prisoner swap, the Birmingham Six, came about because we needed an American-inspired solution to Northern Ireland during the Troubles. It doesn't matter whether they're innocent or guilty. Now, in civilised, first-world remote type analysis, it's easy to be sympathetic towards who think they're the underdog. it would be selfish of me to find a love for Lebanese food when I lived in London, and then hope that there's some refugees that are going to be able to move that food to other areas of Britain, subtly increase the sympathies for the whole nation of Lebanon. But overseas foreign workers from the country that I mentioned earlier but didn't support the NHS, they get the opportunity to be British citizens after only a few years, and they can express themselves in the free market economy, earning twice as much as a private nurse, subjected to the ebbs and flows of the private system, but fairly assured of the needs of the NHS, National Health Service. Humanitarianism in war, Médecins Sans Frontières, Joe Biden calming the situation, all these need praise really in volatile times.
This is George. George worked in a big bank in the City of London. But one day, without warning, George's bank went bust. Luckily, the government rescued the bank and George kept his job. But the greedy government wanted something in return for their help. They demanded a higher tax on George's salary and bonus. For someone with a high-cost lifestyle like George, a shock like this can be devastating. Now George struggles to afford the rent on his riverside apartment in central London. The tyres on his Aston Martin are wearing thin and are barely road legal. Unless George's situation improves, or unless someone like you helps him, then George may even be forced to walk past the next Savile Row tailors and buy his suit from Topshop or Next. Even if George had anything to celebrate, he can no longer afford the champagne to celebrate with. George is not alone. Countless others are suffering like him, and no one knows how long it'll be until the good times return. But with your help, George can turn his life around. A simple monthly donation from you can bring a bit of sunshine back to George's life. Just £395 will help him celebrate minor achievements with a magnum of Cristal champagne. As little as £900 will help George buy a new set of tyres for his Aston Martin. £2,000 can help George recover his self-esteem with a suit from a prestigious Savile Row tailor. But even a small amount will help. Just £200 will buy a meal for George and his girlfriend Experience. Just £200 extra will buy the drinks. By adopting a banker, you won't just be supporting someone like George in a time of need. You'll also be supporting the trendy wine bars of the City of London, the luxury car makers of Italy, and the tailors of Savile Row. You'll be doing your patriotic duty to support Britain's greatest industry in its time of need. And when the good times return and George gets his bonus back, the taxes he pays will help fund the public services that the rest of you scroungers depend on. So please, until the good times return for George and those like him, will you give today?
hoping of all these crocodiles on the bank with the fleet, and the bloody bloke in charge of it.
And I'm Rosie. I hope I'll find you. You'll find me.
Oh, that's right.
What could be more British than an antiques market? Well, I don't know if it's British, perhaps they don't have them in Scotland, perhaps it rains too much. It does rain quite a lot in Wales as well, and Northern Ireland isn't part of Britain really anymore. What could be more English than an antiques market? On a sunny summer's autumn, whenever you're watching this day. No, you do still get antique shops in cute swelled towns, but they are a little bit few and far between. They do trap some of the South Korean tourist market that arrive on the coaches and try to see the whole of the area in a short period of time. I don't know if Americans are seeing them as bargains at the moment, but in America, don't they all get all their antiques from those storage lockup garage crazy guys bidding for mystery items? No, there are those two guys that drive around in a van, knocking on people's doors, saying, have you got any antiques? I don't think they really do it like that today. They're much too high market for that, and then they sell it all on the internet. But it's a real trawl, I think. I used to live above an antique shop, an old Polish guy that had jumped over the wall, the Iron Curtain, to get into Germany. He was a bit of a hoarder. He'd taken time finding these things, like being surrounded by them, and he was a bit reluctant to let go of them for pocket money. His shop, was just round the corner, next door but one, to the chandelier shop. It's quite an amazing place to walk into, full of chandeliers that you wouldn't be particularly keen on having in your own house, but as a bulk thing, they're absolutely amazing and beautiful. And expensive. And heavy, and would bring down the ceiling most likely. Even sag the beams. People do have to reinforce their floors and ceilings to have chandeliers. Huge shop, that one. They do have other things. No, it wasn't so many years ago that the trendy old town bars, just opposite, there used to be another hoarder of antiques. His shop was almost rarely open. All glass on two sides, full to the rafters with things that were obviously not junk, but they had something of an arrangement to them that made them look like pure tat. Whenever you went out for a night on the town or on the pull or whatever it was called, that antique shop, the hoarder's antique shop, would have its own draw to your attention just as much as the bright lights. Now, eventually, he died with all his stock still in the shop. It was sold off, and this man that everyone thought basically lived like a tramp, £1 million, much significant amount more than £1 million, and this was when £1 million was worth something. He wasn't so daft after all. He knew what he'd got, and he knew something when he found out. Antiques Roadshow has just started up on BBC again. I haven't noticed it for years. I don't know why I have recently. Where the general public can go along to a fine period building or mansion or country estate, a stately home perhaps, and have there often tat, often jewels, often real obscure things, a few illegal things, valued by experts. Of course, just like America has its yard sales, we have car boot sales. A car boot sale tends to be a lot of yard sales all put together. You're just selling out the back of your car on a little wallpapering table. And obviously there's the semi-professionals set up. Now, a flea market is something slightly different. This is often a collection of people that have made their own personal trawls of charity shops, I'd say. Charity shops, many and varied, contents, flea markets, specialist stalls. Car boot, many and varied stalls. Charity shops are getting much more expensive. In France, though, I haven't really seen that much by way of antique shops either. Perhaps the rents are pushing them out. I have seen antiques markets. Of course, they're called Brocante. I'd say that the French Brocante is very overpriced compared to the English one. I suppose it also depends how long it's been in town, but I think the French tend to avoid Brocante markets. They might have a cursory glance, but they don't really look as if they've got any intention of buying, but perhaps that's like a haggling technique. They don't even look very interested. But a French Brocante market in the town square has an awful lot of tat. You wonder why they're dragging it round from town to town, the traders. Sorry, I'm using traders as a swear word there almost, aren't I? Where it's a word a bit like a god in America. Is it not? Traders are the American dream personified. Old French postcards I always like looking through. You get droves and droves of them, nicely categorised by region and town. The big old Brocante barn that used to be on the side of the tree-lined road along the Isère River, heading off to my alpine town on the B road if you're not taking the péage. I noticed it closed down the last time I drove by. They used to have a sleigh, not an antique sleigh, but it was a reproduction sleigh, but I suppose you need that in an alpine antique shop. You never know when that tourist chalet complex is going to need that focal point. Horse-drawn sleighs aren't just for Christmas and Santa and his reindeer. Is there a business to be had at making and renting out large horse-drawn sleighs for a couple of months a year? Or would it not even pay the storage? British charity shops are a fairly small affair. They are shops. You do get ones that have furniture, tend to be either one thing or the other. Much more of the one than the other. Disposing of your unwanted furniture is rare. But unwanted building materials, it's unheard of in Britain. But France, the M&Ls, you'll get lots of timber tiles, odd windows, old doors. Always it's what would be in Britain the architectural salvage. There are some, even in Brick Lane in London. Piled high in good hoarder style.
And Chamonix this
I
time.
will show you
Usually
my
it's
little
Chambéry.
board of building materials sometime.
Strangely, for the
But we'll stick
first
with
time,
antiques for now. I did fairly recently
dozen
work with a couple
times,
of guys that were very keen
I
metal
wasn't
detectorists
checked.
going through British. I had to keep away from them.
I do wonder
Quite
if it's got
interesting.
something to do with
They
him saying
saying
to
some poor
British bloke on
because
the
it has to
other
be
side, on the
a
French side,
licensed
passport,
site, and they
when
can
he's
see
doing
them
that
coming.
business or holiday.
To just
Maybe a couple of things that you like or anything.
here we're contrasting
holiday
a
category.
British antiques
Every time
market
you drive
and
over onto the
a
ferry
French
lane,
M&S
passport gets
Brocante
stamped.
charity
So,
shop.
On the way there, on the
Hall,
face of it, they
barn,
were innocently saying to
depot
me,
and three
show your card, show your card. And
Gone are the days
Stamp
when
your passport.
Americans flooded over in
Keep
the
it chatty
80s
when you're talking
and
to
brought
customers.
up a load of
My main concern
European
is that
antiques.
someone that sometimes is
And
going
then there's the
to say that,
post-war
oh,
period,
live
of
over
course.
there.
Well,
That means your car
the
insurance might not be
Guggenheims
valid
were
in
grasping for all the art.
with your British motor.
No, the British have taken
anyway,
advantage of
if
the
I
White
loaded,
Russians
managed to
and their exodus
momentarily
after the revolution.
my
All their
French wallet
worldly goods
with my boxes
and
in a pocket,
genetic
in
lines.
a bag that I then
And
loaded
of course, after the
a
French
whole
Revolution,
band's worth of things
all
on
the
top of. So
prestige product
So I was
artisans
actually taking
would have fled across the channel.
€120
Antiques
detour into
traders,
Germany
shall we call them,
to buy
scoured the
rather
chateaus
pick up
and the auction houses
leisure
and
battery.
brought that over in
A blue
droves.
letting.
They were
Couldn't
even
actually
almost
buy
as
it 'cause I
unpopular
didn't
as
have a
the
card.
and the petty
So
aristocracy
I didn't know I
that
was coming, so I
fled
came with stock.
and were working on the streets of Britain. Benjamin Franklin, the American, a spy, and agent provocateur, and borderline professional sex pest, where he found the most fruitful places to lay his plans of men
stock
to
is
the
really the
meek and the
subject here.
mice-like,
There's
distrustfully playing on
second-hand
both
shop, I
camps
suppose
and
you could
against
say.
both in a
Vêtements,
quite
clothing,
current
in a
affairs
little
type of
setback
way.
from the
Which
main
got
street
First
of
Testament
Chamonix.
type
There's
results.
this second-hand shop with all the
If
big
Benjamin
designs,
Franklin
all
slotted the
together,
cash at
cheap
the dance
gel.
halls, he got
halfway
all the
reasonable prices
intelligence
at
and
the
gossip
start of the
need.
season. Later
All
in
the
the season, I think
malleable
their
and
stock
all the
tends to thin
blackmailable.
out and the prices
Though he
go up.
himself, potentially
They
very
take a lot of
fluid in his
donations,
sexuality.
whether those donations do come
Viagra,
straight to them.
don't know if it was
but
around in
there
Benjamin
is a
Franklin's days, but
charity shop
look up
in
another
a
video
remote
that I've done on
location in
Viagra.
Chamonix, and I think they
That
go
would suit the
routinely
opportunist.
and have
if
their
you've never heard of
inside
it.
person.
If
and
you
get a lot
had
of
the
their
right
stock from the
metadata,
Emmaus. You can
could
search
you
and find
flip
it, but it's not actually
Viagra?
in London. A lot of the second-hand stores down Portobello Road and what have you, they get their stock from trawling charity shops. It's always the richer areas that have the best stuff. Have you the snowfall over my mountain road shortcut to work for the week? I went through Annecy on the flat road and took a detour to Chambly and visited one of the Emmaus vêtements clothing shops that they have. Some Americans and Canadians. These two young women talking as if they were clearly disappointed with what they'd found from going out of their way to the place, but trying to make the most of it and concerned that the prices weren't quite what they were hoping, I think. And then I went to the big one near Frontenac in Chambly. Now, I was going because a neighbour had told me they quite often have a stock of rustic cut wood boards, waney edged. They didn't have them that day, but they did have a lot of building products, I suppose you'd call loads and loads of tiling, like good quality marble tiles, an excellent selection of armoires, wardrobes, and everything under the sun when it comes to bric-a-brac. I think you have to get there quite early in the morning. There was a huge crowd, really, and quite a few British leaving as I was arriving. That crowd gets all the best stock first thing, I think. A bit like January sales, because there's an awful lot of awful clothes, all that's left later on. Emmaus always It's staffed by Africans, and there's local volunteers as well as that. But the local volunteers very much take their instruction from the permanent Africans, but then the local staff are the more trusted when it comes to money and things. They deal with all the money. I was slightly uncomfortable with the setup because there's this big Arab fella that seems to be the overseer of all the blacks, like some traditional archaic system of 1,000 years ago. And all the people that aren't volunteers, they all live on site in something that's been built for them by Amos. Very nice accommodation. Don't know how big it is and how many people live in one of these quite small terrace of well-appointed and well-designed, nicely detailed huts, I'll have to call them. But I was intent on trying to buy the materials that they were using to finish off the next phase of the staff accommodation. But the Arab overseer had taken a dislike to me anyway. He sent me off with this chap that didn't really speak English, but he was ordering me to be speaking English with his colleague. I had a pleasant chat, saying as we were walking away, I think it is difficult for you, but let's make you look good in front of your boss, okay? And he was all smiles. But the big Emos in a decent-sized town, it's a very different experience to British charity shops, which tend to specialise. You never get the building materials like you do. You get separate furniture shops, you get separate clothing shops, you get bric-a-brac, but you never get the building materials, which we need this in Britain. Reuse, recycle, repurpose, whatever it is. Please like and subscribe. At the Geneva Emos on the roundabout, there's a receptionist, I thought. I went up the stairs, till I came back down. I had to look round downstairs. The African guy who I thought was a receptionist welcoming me, absent-mindedly greeted back without really looking. He's there talking to himself all day long, I suspect. But it's not constant. It seems to be sort of stimulated by people walking in. But it does give you a little bit of a dimension on what's being done there. Is it the journey or his stimulus to make the journey in the first place? I just go there looking for a cheap pair of jeans and I get upset or offended when there's a old gent sort of trying it on with one of them. And the female workers seem to accept it as an opportunity. But perhaps the receptionist is an opportunity for the ladies. He was a handsome guy, and obviously if so customer facing, he's going to be malleable. What did your daughter do at school today? What did your daughter do at school today? Bruges, tourist centre in Belgium. A spicy kebab and a visit to the night shop. 18 and 20 euros they had it for. A litre of wine, Bordeaux. Same thing, French supermarket had for 2 euros a litre. 13.5%. It's not cooking wine, you have to cook off the alcohol and evaporate off. And you don't have to. A litre bottle, it's a bit of fun compared to a 750ml one. To drink around the campfire with who you carry a flame for. I can't actually say whether it was the kebab or the wine that was a little bit sharp tasting in combination and made me feel a bit queasy around the stomach area, sort of. A bit of a churning sensation. A bird in love. Fluttering and a spot of flatulence. Not enough to make those flags blow. The subject today is gut rot wine. Is it really that bad? Why have I included whatnot in the title? Whatnot refers to Chenet wines. These are a couple of other very cheap wines that ferry companies heavily promote and subsidise as their duty-free wine. You'll also find it as a option in newsagents in England and more widely Britain. I've included both the Merlot version and the Cabernet Sauvignon. Now, these didn't have any strange internal effect other than the alcohol content that was intended. However, they taste like a fruit juice, like Ribena or like currant, or a red grape juice that's had all the sweetness and sugar taken out of it. They're very fruity. If you wanted to give wine to children that wouldn't like it, be able to put a bit of water in it for them, these are the ones to go for, I would say. Alcoholic Ribena. It's not more subtle than putting vodka in Ribena, I'll give them that much. While I'll put these in the piss poor bottle of wine category, not the same as the acidicness that you get of Ardèche wine. The saddest, worst thing about it, though, is that you really do feel on your ferry home that Brexit has all been so that some of these Chenet vineyards and South African vineyards can sell their wine because no one else is touching it. Brexiteers, bankers and South Africans all want us to look like these Giacometti statues drinking our wine in the park, I think. Making the poor poorer.